The spiritual battle is coming to the West, and the enemies are wokeism or Marxism combining with Islamism to go after what we call the American way of life.
This is your daily dose of all things royal. Welcome back, my gorgeous, good-looking friends. King Charles is probably pissed off with the United States' latest America First announcement. Back on January 7th, the United States withdrew from 66 international bodies. In this video, I'm going to explain how the United States' withdrawal from these international bureaucracies have an impact on the monarchy and the royal family's relevance on the global stage. Brilliantly articulated on the U.S. Department of State Substack, Marco Rubio explains the reasoning behind ending the charade of wasteful international organizations. After reading it once through, I've come to the conclusion that our decision undermines the royal family's global soft power projects, especially King Charles's climate crusades, and Meghan Markle's lofty UN ambitions, and why that's decidedly a good thing from an America First perspective. But first, I think it's really important to understand where this is all coming from by reading this blog that Marco Rubio just posted. It's very clear that Marco Rubio is addressing Europe, because he kicks off this blog by saying, "The United States has played a central role in shaping the international order. From the Monroe Doctrine, which allowed nations in our region to flourish free from interference outside of our hemisphere, aka Europe, to our pivotal role in the establishment of the United Nations, to serving as the primary security guarantor under the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, otherwise known as NATO, and as the world's largest humanitarian donor. America's leadership has been unquestionable. Leadership requires difficult choices and the ability to recognize when the institutions created to promote peace, prosperity, and liberty have become obstacles to those goals. What we term the international system is now overrun with hundreds of opaque international organizations, many with overlapping mandates, duplicative actions, ineffective outputs, and poor financial and ethical governance. Even those that once performed useful functions have increasingly become inefficient bureaucracies, platforms for politicized activism, or instruments contrary to our nation's best interests. Not only do these institutions not deliver results, they obstruct action by those who wish to address these problems. The era of writing blank checks to international bureaucracies is over. This week, in accordance with the findings of Executive Order 14199, President Trump announced our withdrawal from 66 international organizations identified as part of the Trump administration's ongoing review of wasteful, ineffective, and harmful international organizations. The presidential memorandum targets institutions that are redundant in their scope, mismanaged, unnecessary, wasteful, poorly run, captured by the interests of actors advancing their own agendas contrary to our own, or a threat to our nation's sovereignty, freedoms, and general prosperity. It is no longer acceptable to invest the American people's hard-earned tax dollars in institutions that cannot demonstrate results, accountability, or respect for our national interests. It is an abdication of America's global leadership to continue funding and promoting organizations that obstruct solutions to the problems facing the world today, such as affordable energy, economic growth, and national sovereignty. Continued U.S. participation in them only legitimizes their existence and a model that has failed billions around the world. Now here's where it gets good. From the UN Population Fund's long history of ethical violations, including funding coerced abortions, to UN Women's failure to define what a woman even is, to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change squandering millions of dollars on funding for climate alarmists, anti-energy investment in the West Bank and Gaza, to the UN Permanent Forum on People of African Descent espousing openly racist policies in support of global reparations. These organizations boast a consistent record of dysfunction, if not outright malice. The American people, our partners, and the billions around the world who look to the United States for leadership deserve better. Our continued participation in organizations that do not reflect our values or serve our interests would be an abandonment of our national duty. This does not mean America is turning its back on the world. We are simply rejecting an outdated model of multilateralism, one that treats the American taxpayer as the world's underwriter for a sprawling architecture of global governance.
There's no doubt that we've entered a very difficult time period with our closest American security ally. Donald Trump is taking America into a place which I can't imagine any previous American president post Second World War would be embarking on. Reagan, Eisenhower, anyone becoming so isolationist in this way. And what J.D. Vance is saying is simply wrong, because, as I mentioned, it's already covered by the NATO alliance, the security pact there. There is, over due course, going to be a greater security threat because the Arctic Circle is becoming more exposed. The ice is melting there. But then let's upgrade. Absolutely. Let's move defense assets to Greenland and do it as an alliance. You don't need to unilaterally take the land over in order to achieve that security objective. So J.D. Vance is making I think, a selfish nationalist case for what America is doing. I have fear that it won't stop there. 2026 is going to be the year of global change as America dials back from any interest or indeed responsibility or duty as custodians of our global order. And we move into this new era of spheres of influence. And for America, it's the Western sphere that concerns them. It won't just be Venezuela, it'll be other countries as well. So this is very dangerous indeed, because, of course, our adversaries will watch what's going on, and they'll see this as license to do exactly the same in their own arenas. And that takes you then to Ukraine. We've begged Donald Trump to recognize that Putin isn't somebody to be trusted. He shouldn't be brought in from the cold. Moscow isn't somebody we can do business with, because they won't stop at Ukraine. They will go further. But Trump isn't listening. And that reflects, again, this gifting, if you like, of Europe or European security concerns to Europe itself, or indeed to Russia. America doesn't care anymore about what happens in Europe.
This guy is so stupid. What is he not getting? We don't want to be partners with you if you're going to be aligned with the Islamic State. That totally conflicts with our democratic values that we hold dear here in the United States, something that the UK seems to not really respect, especially the First Amendment.
What is the first Islamist? Right, because it's important to separate. There are Muslims who are not Islamists, right? Islamists are like theocrats, right? What is the first Islamist country that is going to have a nuclear weapon? And I sort of joked, I said, maybe it's going to be the United Kingdom, because they're so bad at assimilating sort of newer immigrants into their society. You have definitely communities in the UK where local leaders are running explicitly on Sharia law and winning elections in cities that are in the United Kingdom, right? This is England. This is like where America came from, right? There's a bunch of English pilgrims who came to the United States. That, to me, is really crazy and really scary. And then, of course, everybody said, well, Pakistan already has nuclear weapons. And my response is, well, Pakistan isn't necessarily an Islamist country. It's an Islamic country. They certainly have an Islamic government, and that's the majority religion of the people. But Pakistan isn't going and saying we need to conquer the infidels. At least their government isn't. We need to conquer the infidels and force them to obey our laws. You see that more among some of the activists in the United Kingdom, maybe than you do in certain Arab countries. And that's crazy.
I think the Vice President, J.D. Vance, said it correctly when he said, look, there is a chance that in the next couple of decades, we are not going to be able to rely on the United Kingdom as a partner. It will be perhaps a majority Muslim nation in our lifetimes. And I think when you bear things like that in mind, it really, really makes it all the more important that we pay attention to what's going on in the mother country of the United Kingdom.
The Trump administration is demanding real results from the institutions we fund and participating in, and we stand ready to lead a campaign for reform. President Trump has been clear, including through this week's presidential memorandum, that he will not allow international organizations to undermine the United States and limit our national sovereignty, our energy independence, our economic prosperity, our democracy, and our constitutional freedoms. He will not allow the United States to continue funding a failed model that refuses or proves impossible to reform. This week's presidential memorandum demonstrated that America is no longer accepting the broken status quo, that this nation is prepared to lead, as it always has, and that sometimes true leadership means knowing when to walk away. So what does this all mean in the grand scheme of things? Well, we know that King Charles has spent decades positioning himself as the global conscience on climate change, urging world leaders to treat global warming like a wartime emergency and pushing sustainable markets and net zero transitions. He even launched his Sustainable Markets Initiative with the stated goal of getting private capital flowing into nature-positive projects and accelerating net zero pledges through 2030. Essentially turning climate alarmism into a global financial agenda, as I've explained in past videos. But this is where the United States comes in and pulls the rug right out from under him, with the United States walking away from hundreds of international organizations, including climate-centric bureaucracies. The very global governance structures Charles relies on are deflated. The bureaucratic machinery that inflates climate crises and moralizes Western energy restrictions now has less money, less legitimacy, and less American participation, cementing its reach. So, rather than being on the world stage, leading the charge in global climate tribunals and funding pipelines, the climate narrative becomes now more regional, more transactional, and less European so-called royal prestige and activist bureaucracy. That's not just a setback for King Charles's eco-aristocrat brand. It's a weakening of the institutional backdrop that made his sustainable ambition seem universally accepted and endorsed. But this is also going to carry over to William when he takes over the throne. You see, the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development and its 17 SDG goals were sold as the blueprint for tackling poverty, inequality, climate change, and much, much more, all backed by UN frameworks and Western elites alike. But with the U.S. voluntarily disappearing from the international apparatus that funded, endorsed, and enforced these goals, the global consensus illusion has been decimated. From an America First perspective, what once looked like irrefutable global unity now looks like a club that lost its biggest checkbook. The SDGs, already lagging and inconsistent and way behind, are now even less enforceable on rich Western states. For the British Crown and political elites who lean on SDGs to validate foreign policy goals, that's a public relations disaster at this point. Their main moral high ground on global sustainability becomes a bit more hollow when the world's largest single economy isn't participating. I think about Meghan Markle and how stupid she looks now. Since stepping away from her so-called royal duties, she positioned herself as this international feminist and human rights advocate with ties to UN Women and other global institutions. She gave those speeches at UN summits, talking about that fake dish soap story, urged girls and women to fight for equality, and adopted globalist feminist rhetoric. Through Meghan's hypocrisy, we know that she didn't believe in any of that shit. More than likely, she profited from it. But here's the reality with this America First theme. The United States backing away from organizations like UN Women takes away that global stage that she has been so counting on. Without American participation or funding, the appeal and reach of these UN forums and all of these diversity, equity, inclusion programs shrink. And when there's no money, There's no influence for celebrity advocates. And I completely called it. When Donald Trump won the election in 2024 and then they cut off USAID, I said to everybody that they were not going to be going on any more international fake royal tours, and they were going to stay locally and grift off of the state, which is exactly what they did. And following suit with all the organizations and people within the censorship complex, as well as foreign governments, shifting focus now to protecting the kids. All of these bills being pushed are in the name of protecting the children. Now, we know that that's pure bullshit. We know that they're using that as the cover because they got caught. Yes, I agree. We do need to protect the kids online, and we need to protect them from the very same people who are the ones that want to silence others. These are the people like Harry and Meghan who are the most corrupt, dishonest, and perverted in our society. They have no business deciding what's best for our children. So when we see Meghan's Hollywood ambition meeting bureaucratic retreat, her stage shrinks. And the audience shifts back to national arenas where celebrities like her have far less automatic credibility than states with hard power. For years, the British Crown and global elites like Prince Harry tried to leverage soft power. Moral leadership on climate, gender equality, global inclusion, to punch above their weight on the world stage. That's why it's such a joke now every time we see Harry trying to do this. London's global moral authority was always partly an illusion propped up by consensus institutions. Once the US saunters off the stage telling everyone to get real about bureaucratic waste, that moral authority starts to look less like gravitas and more like ineffective virtue signaling. So in summary, for most of its history, the British royal family didn't need a mission statement. Its purpose was obvious: national unity, constitutional continuity, and symbolism rooted in sovereignty. But the modern monarchy quietly changed their job description. As empire faded and political power shifted elsewhere, the royal family essentially rebranded itself, not as a governing force, but as a moral one, and I've explained this in previous videos. Climate leadership, global humanitarianism, sustainable development. That's soft power wrapped in ceremony. That reinvention only works if global institutions matter, and that's where the problem begins. When the United States steps away from international organizations it now views as wasteful, ideological, or ineffective, it doesn't just withdraw funding, it withdraws the legitimacy. The global consensus these institutions claim to represent suddenly look thinner, less universal, and less serious. For King Charles, this is especially damaging. His climate ambitions, for emergency-style rhetoric to the Sustainable Markets Initiative, depend on the idea that global climate governance is the future of power. And what the elites and the aristocrats hate is that the Americans no longer want to foot the bill for this. Those forums all of a sudden stop being engines of policy and start looking like regular networking events. Conferences without enforcement, declarations without consequence. From a U.S. realist perspective, Charles isn't leading anything. He's just hosting conversations while the largest economy doesn't want to be a part of it. Now, that doesn't destroy the monarchy, but it exposes how performative its modern mission has become. The same dynamic plays out even more when you look at Meghan Markle. Her post-royal ambitions were never British. They were supranational. UN Women, global feminist advocacy, international moral platforms. Those stages only matter if the United States treats them as serious centers of influence, and they're no longer that. And it explains why Meghan Markle and Prince Harry have failed so badly in the United States. When the US disengages, the platforms shrink. These spotlights start to dim, and the celebrity activist model loses its power, which is exactly what happened with Harry and Meghan. What was marketed as global leadership suddenly looks like branding without backing, and that's why the Sussex brand has tanked so badly. And with all this fraud being tied to all of these NGOs and the destruction that they have caused, it's going to be very hard for Harry and Meghan to get out from under that. And it's not just Harry and Meghan that are caught up in this. We're talking about the globalists. The globalists are responsible for the destruction that we're seeing across the West while they line their pockets and do what they want. And this includes the royal family, because when you look at the pain that regular folks are experiencing, it doesn't affect them. I think many people notice that the royal family today relies less on domestic function and more on international validation. This is why they do and say nothing about the illegal migration, the raping of British girls, or the corrupted authoritarian state of the Labour government. Its relevance is increasingly outsourced to global institutions that are now being questioned, defunded, or ignored by the main superpower that was funding them. That's not strength, that's dependency. And this is not about abolishing the monarchy. It doesn't mean that this will end the crown, but it just narrows their justification to exist. The royal family is strongest, and I hope they can get back to this, when it's national, apolitical, and stabilizing, making the church and defending the church as the central focus. Now, I'm going to go ahead and make a prediction. I don't think it's going to happen this year, but I think it will take several years, maybe when Prince William takes the throne. But I do think there will be a shift with the royal family to begin focusing back on its people and returning back to its roots of what the monarchy really is supposed to represent. This right now, in what we're seeing, is totally unrecognizable. And I think a big reason why the royal family choose to look the other way with all the crazy that's going on right now in the UK, especially with Islam conquering the country, is because they are also in self-preservation. They dare speak out about it. They're outnumbered. I mean, look at what's going on in the United States. I think there's a tremendous amount of fear in the UK that should they decide to start deporting a lot of these illegal migrants coming into the UK, that they're going to be overrun by it. They're going to be overwhelmed, and they're not going to be able to handle taking care of it like how we have here in the United States. Like, they're probably watching the United States and saying, this is going to happen to us, but we don't have the manpower or the police force that could handle an Islamic uprising. I think many of them are extremely afraid, especially some of the police who are not able to carry around firearms. The UK police are afraid, and they have admitted so. Labour has lost control of the country.
We are in the middle of an epidemic of moral cowardice, I'm afraid, in our country. We are appeasing some of the worst people because the police are afraid.
Right, support right now, units. Leave me the fucking alone. 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 Leave me the fucking alone.
Oh, why are you sick in the brain?
Leave me the fucking alone.
You're going to get into big trouble for videoing this. Will you copy yourself, Anne?
And I have senior contacts in the police who tell me that their biggest fear is Muslims kicking off. So that mustn't be allowed to happen. And then their other fear is that a lot of us now have started refusing to go along with the multiculturalism has worked out absolutely brilliantly. And they are now afraid of people pointing that out.
Can you imagine if the UK is protesting now over things that are not even happening in the UK and directly affecting people in the UK? Imagine what's going to happen should, let's say, an election get called and Starmer gets kicked out as well as Labour. And let's say a new regime comes in, like Reform, and starts mass deportations. Imagine the temperature that's going to be in the UK, especially with the majority of the population being Islamic. Things will get ugly. It looks like in Parliament on Monday, there will be a discussion over the calls for an immediate general election. Over 1 million signatures signed to hold an election because they want Starmer gone. The likelihood of this happening, I think it's slim. I can't see the Labour government risking giving up power so easily by giving in to listening to what the people want. You know, like if they haven't been listening to the people for over the last 2 years, why are they going to start now? You know what I mean? As an outsider looking in, it does appear to me that Labour is determined to burn the UK down. I think the most treasonous thing of all is that all of these politicians know that the security of the country is vulnerable right now. Even Keir Starmer admits that, like, these migrant hotels, they wouldn't want to be living around them because of the unvetted people that have come into the country.
Where there is an asylum hotel, how would you feel if it was a hotel at the end of your road? If your daughter was having to walk past one of these hotels every day, how would that make you feel?
I completely get it. I mean, local people, by and large, do not want these hotels in their towns, in their place, and nor do I.
How are the good people of the UK going to be able to defend themselves when the time comes? The UK military in itself is deficient, and they want to send people over to Ukraine to fight? Who's going to fight for the UK and the people there? You think the Home Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, is going to protect the British people?
I am a patriot, proudly so. Mine is the patriotism of Orwell, pride in a country that is forever changing, while also ineffably always the same. It is a love of this country as an open, tolerant, generous place. But that broad vision of who we are is increasingly disputed. Patriotism, a force for good, is turning into something smaller, something more like ethno-nationalism, which struggles to accept that someone who looks like me and has a faith like mine can truly be English or British. There are some who we will never be able to persuade. But there are others, a growing number, who are on a path from patriotism towards ethno-nationalism. And this can be stopped. But to do so, we have to understand why so many people feel this country is not working for them.
But where you see actual real religious tyranny is increasingly in Western societies where you've had a large influx of immigrants who don't necessarily assimilate into Western values, but try to create, I think, a religious tyranny at the local level. And if you think that won't happen at a national level, you're crazy.
And the sad part about this is that the UK thinks that the solution to these problems in the UK is censoring everyone. But I'd love to know your thoughts. Definitely let me know your thoughts below. As always, I will be back with more content. But until then, please be safe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye!
Such a fraud.